What if a letter you wrote to yourself years ago, just for fun, started dictating your life in 2026, word for word? I found one, and what it predicted, what it demanded, is all coming true. The problem? Some of it is truly terrifying, threatening to unravel everything I know. Can I stop it, or am I just a puppet of my past? I wasn't looking for it. That's the thing about the past. It has a way of finding you when you least expect it, when you're vulnerable, distracted, thinking about anything else. I was cleaning out my apartment on a gray February afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low and heavy, threatening snow that never quite arrives. My landlord had finally agreed to replace the ancient dresser in my bedroom, a hulking oak monstrosity that had been there since before I moved in 5 years ago. I'd opened every drawer 1,000 times, or so I thought. But there was a drawer I'd missed, a shallow one, hidden behind the bottom panel, revealed only when the movers tilted the dresser forward. It slid open with a reluctant groan, and inside lay a single envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in handwriting I immediately recognized as my own. My younger self's handwriting, to be precise. The letters rounder, more optimistic somehow, from a time before life had beaten certain enthusiasms out of me. The envelope was dated April 15th, 2019, 7 years ago. I would have been 22, fresh out of college, full of the kind of naive certainty that makes you do stupid things like write letters to your future self. I'd done it on a whim during some forgotten moment of introspection, probably after too much wine with friends who thought time capsules were profound rather than pretentious. I almost threw it away. I was already running late for a meeting, and the movers were waiting, making that impatient shuffle that costs money by the minute. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe. Or perhaps the letter itself wanted to be found, though that thought wouldn't occur to me until much later, when it was already too late. I tore open the envelope. The paper inside was thick, expensive. I'd apparently thought this deserved better than notebook scraps. The handwriting sprawled across 3 pages, and I settled onto the floor, my back against the wall, and began to read. "Dear future me," it began, and I couldn't help but smile at the formality. "I'm writing this on the night of my college graduation party. Everyone's asleep now, but I'm wide awake, thinking about who you'll become. I wonder if you'll even remember writing this. Probably not, but I want to tell you about what I think is coming, about the life I'm creating for us." The first page was harmless enough. Predictions about my career. I'd hoped to be working in architecture by now, which I was, though the reality was far less glamorous than I had imagined. I'd pictured myself designing museums and concert halls. Instead, I spent my days creating office spaces and residential developments. Close enough, I supposed. The letter mentioned a hope that I'd stay close with my college friends, which hadn't happened. People drift. It's what they do. Then I reached the second page, and my amusement began to curdle into something else. By February 2026, you'll be living alone in a city apartment. You'll have a small scar on your left hand from a cooking accident involving a mandolin slicer. Your favorite coffee shop will have closed, replaced by a chain that spells your name wrong every single time, even though you've been going there for months. You'll own a gray cat named Pilot, who sleeps on your kitchen counter despite your best efforts to train him otherwise. I stopped reading. My left hand had moved unconsciously to my right, fingers tracing the thin white line across my palm. The mandolin incident had happened 8 months ago, a stupid moment of distraction that cost me 3 stitches. The coffee shop had closed in January, replaced by a corporate place where the baristas wrote Damian or Damien on my cup, never quite getting Damon right. And Pilot, my gray tabby, was at that very moment sprawled across the kitchen counter, directly next to the "Keep Off" sign I'd bought in a fit of optimism. These weren't the kind of predictions you could make. They were too specific, too trivial. Anyone could guess that a 22-year-old might end up working in their field of study, might drift from college friends, but a mandolin slicer? A misspelled name at a specific replacement coffee shop? A cat with that particular name and that particular habit? I looked at the date on the letter again. April 15, 2019. 7 years ago. I hadn't owned a mandolin slicer. I'd lived in a different city. I hadn't adopted Pilot yet. He'd come into my life 3 years ago, a rescue from the shelter, and I'd named him after my favorite Hemingway novel. The coffee shop that closed hadn't even existed in 2019. It had opened in 2023. There was no way my younger self could have known these things. No way to predict them. Unless I had predicted them. Unless somehow I had written them into being. My hands were shaking now, a fine tremor that made the paper rattle. I forced myself to keep reading, to finish the second page, and that's when I saw it, a line that changed everything. On February 9th, 2026, you'll find this letter. And that's when everything will begin. I checked my phone. February 9th, 2026. Today. The apartment suddenly felt too cold, too quiet. The movers had left at some point during my reading. I hadn't even noticed them go. I was alone with the letter, with my past self's words, and with the growing certainty that something impossible was happening. The third page remained unread in my hands, and I could feel the weight of it, the significance. Whatever came next would change things. I knew it with the same certainty that I knew my own name, the same certainty with which my younger self had known about the scar and the cat and the coffee shop. But I had to know. Even if some part of me, the part that still believed in rationality and coincidence, screamed to burn the letter and forget I'd ever found it, I had to know what else was written there, what else was coming, what else I'd somehow known 7 years ago about a future I hadn't yet lived. I turned to the final page and continued reading, and that's when the predictions stopped being predictions and the real horror began. The third page wasn't written in the same tone as the first two. The handwriting changed halfway down, becoming more frantic. The letters pressed harder into the paper as though my younger self had been gripping the pen too tightly. The playful speculation was gone, replaced by something that read like a warning, or perhaps a confession. The predictions aren't just guesses, it read. I need you to understand that. By the time you read this, you'll have confirmed enough of them to know I'm not lying. The scar, the cat, the coffee shop, these are just proof. Proof that what comes next is real, that you need to take it seriously. Because starting now, starting the moment you found this letter, the predictions become directives. You'll understand the difference soon enough. I read the words 3 times, trying to find some other interpretation, some way they could mean something less insane. Directives, commands, as if my past self was reaching through time to control me, to dictate my choices. It was absurd. Letters didn't work that way. Time didn't work that way. But the scar on my hand was real. Pilot was real, currently grooming himself on the forbidden counter. The barista who'd written Damien on my cup that very morning was real. I kept reading. February 10th, 2026. Tomorrow. You'll receive an email at 10:47 a.m. from a former colleague named Victoria Hirsch. You haven't spoken to her in 2 years. She'll invite you to lunch, and you'll want to ignore it because you remember the way your friendship ended, badly, with accusations and hurt feelings. But you need to go. You need to accept her invitation within 1 hour of receiving it. This is important. This is the first directive. I checked my contacts. Victoria Hirsch was still there, her number unchanged, despite the fact that we hadn't communicated since a disastrous project in 2024, where we both blamed each other for missing a critical deadline. The friendship had imploded over email, harsh words that couldn't be unsent. The thought of having lunch with her made my stomach clench. But the letter knew. It knew she'd contact me tomorrow at a specific time. And if it knew that, if it had been right about everything else, then what happened if I didn't follow this directive? What happened if I refused? The next paragraph answered my unspoken question. I know you're wondering what happens if you don't obey. I was wondering the same thing when I wrote this, sitting here in my graduation party dress, with wine stains on the hem, writing by candlelight because the power went out. I can't tell you exactly what will happen because I haven't lived it yet, but I can tell you this. The directives aren't suggestions, they're corrections. You're already off course, Damon. You've been off course for years. These directives will fix it, or they'll break you trying. There's no third option. My mouth had gone dry. This didn't sound like me at 22. I'd been optimistic then, maybe naively so, but not ominous, not threatening. The voice in this letter belonged to someone else, or to some version of myself I didn't recognize. I forced myself to continue. The rest of the page contained more predictions, each one dated, each one specific. February 14th, 2026. You'll be walking home from work when you see a man in a red jacket standing on the corner of 5th and Madison. He'll be holding a sign that says, "The end is negotiable." You'll think he's just another street preacher, another lost soul with a message for a city that stopped listening years ago. But when you walk past him, he'll say your name, not sir or hey you, but Damon, and he'll hand you something. You need to take it. Don't ask questions, don't stop to talk. Just take it and keep walking. February 20th. 2026, your supervisor, Bernard Lowe, will call you into his office at 3 p.m. He'll offer you a promotion, a significant one, with a title change and a 30% salary increase. You'll want to accept it. You've been working for this for 3 years, but you need to decline. You need to tell him you're not interested, that you're considering other opportunities. He'll be confused, maybe angry. Accept his anger. Don't explain yourself. February 28th, 2026. You'll receive a package at your apartment. No return address. Inside will be a key and a photograph. The photograph will show a house you've never seen before, but you'll recognize it anyway. Something about it will feel familiar, like a memory you can't quite grasp. The key will fit the front door of that house. You need to go there, alone, at midnight on March 1st. This is the most important directive. Everything depends on this one. I set the letter down, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it. This had gone beyond eerie coincidence into the territory of impossible. My younger self couldn't have known about Victoria, about Bernard, about future events that involved other people's choices and actions, unless those choices weren't really choices, unless everything was predetermined, written into existence by a letter I'd penned 7 years ago in a moment of wine-soaked inspiration or madness. The rational part of my brain, the part that had studied engineering principles and load-bearing calculations, screamed that this was confirmation bias. I'd remember the predictions that came true and forget the ones that didn't. Or maybe I'd subconsciously engineer situations to make them true, to validate the letter's claims. The human mind was capable of extraordinary self-deception. But the scar, the timing, the specificity. I grabbed my laptop and opened my email, scrolling through my inbox with increasing desperation, looking for any prior communication with Victoria, any hint that we'd been planning to reconnect. Nothing. Radio silence since April 2024. I checked my calendar for tomorrow. No appointments at 10:47 a.m. Nothing scheduled. The apartment felt different now. The shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. Pilot had stopped grooming himself and was staring at me with those unblinking green eyes that cats have, the ones that sometimes seem to see things humans can't. I wondered if he knew something I didn't, if somehow he was part of this too, a prediction made flesh and fur. I thought about calling someone, my brother maybe, or my friend Julian, who'd always been good in a crisis. But what would I say? That I'd found a letter from my past self that was predicting the future with impossible accuracy? That I was being given directives by someone who was simultaneously me and not me? They'd think I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. The letter had one final paragraph, written at the very bottom of the third page in letters so small I had to squint to read them. You're going to want to test this, to prove it wrong. Tomorrow, when Victoria's email arrives, you'll consider ignoring it just to see what happens, just to reclaim some sense of control. I'm begging you not to. I'm begging you to trust me, to trust yourself, to understand that I wrote this for a reason. The directives will seem strange, even harmful, but they're necessary. They're the only way to fix what's broken. And something is very, very broken, Damon. You'll start to see it soon. The cracks in reality, the places where things don't quite line up, the moments when you'll realize that the world you've been living in isn't quite what you thought it was. I read that final line again. The world you've been living in isn't quite what you thought it was. What did that mean? Was this some elaborate psychological breakdown? My mind fracturing under stress I hadn't even realized I was carrying? Or was it something else, something worse? I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. My hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a cold numbness that spread from my fingertips up through my arms. Tomorrow I would know. At 10:47 a.m., my phone would either ping with an email from Victoria Hirsch or it wouldn't. Either the letter would be proven right again, or I could write this all off as a strange coincidence, a weird artifact from my past that meant nothing. But I already knew what would happen. Deep in my bones, in the part of me that wrote that letter 7 years ago in a moment of wine-soaked inspiration or madness, the email would come, and I would have to decide whether to obey the directive or face whatever consequences came with defiance. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with Pilot curled beside me, watching the hours tick by on my phone, waiting for tomorrow to arrive and confirm what I already feared, that my life was no longer my own, that I was following a script written by a version of myself I no longer recognized, and that the worst was yet to come. The email arrived at exactly 10:47 a.m. I'd been staring at my phone for the past 20 minutes, watching the clock in the corner tick through the seconds with agonizing slowness. When the notification finally appeared, I actually flinched, nearly dropping the device onto the floor of my office. The preview was visible on my lock screen. Victoria Hirsch. Long time no talk. Coffee? My heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me had still hoped, desperately, that it wouldn't happen, that the letter would be proven wrong, that I could dismiss everything as elaborate coincidence or stress-induced delusion. But there it was, exactly when the letter had predicted, from exactly who it had named. I opened the full email with shaking fingers. Hey, Damon, I know this is coming out of nowhere, and I know we didn't exactly part on great terms, but I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about our friendship, about the project, about how things fell apart. I'd really like to talk if you're open to it. Lunch this week? My treat. No pressure if you're not interested, but I hope you are. I miss having you in my life. Vic. The message was kind, vulnerable even. The Victoria I remembered had been sharp and guarded, someone who'd rather cut ties completely than admit to any emotional attachment. This version, reaching out with something approaching humility, felt like a stranger. Or maybe she'd changed in the 2 years since we'd spoken. People did that. People evolved. I glanced at the letter, now living in the top drawer of my desk where I could see it every time I reached for a pen. You need to accept her invitation within 1 hour of receiving it. 58 minutes left. I typed out 3 different responses and deleted them all. What was I supposed to say? Hi, Vic. I'd love to have lunch because a letter from my past self told me I had to, and if I don't, something terrible might happen, though I have no idea what. I settled on something simple. Hey, yes, let's do it. Thursday work for you? Short, non-committal, but still an acceptance. I hit send at 11:32 a.m., 15 minutes to spare. Nothing happened. No cosmic shift, no sudden clarity, no voice from the heavens confirming I'd made the right choice. Just the ordinary hum of my office, the distant sound of traffic through the window, and the slow drip of the coffee maker in the break room. I felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed, as if I'd been bracing for an impact that never came. Victoria responded within minutes, suggesting a bistro near my office for Thursday at noon. I agreed, and then I tried, unsuccessfully, to focus on the renovation plans spread across my desk, a boutique hotel conversion that suddenly seemed absurdly trivial compared to the impossibility I was living through. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and hypervigilance. I jumped at every notification, scrutinized every interaction, waiting for the next prediction to manifest. Thursday arrived, too quickly and not quickly enough. I found myself standing outside the bistro at 11:55 a.m., 5 minutes early, my palms sweating despite the February cold. Victoria was already inside, seated at a corner table by the window. She'd cut her hair short since I'd last seen her, and she looked thinner, more tired. But her smile when she saw me was genuine, and that somehow made everything worse. Because I wasn't here because I wanted to be. I was here because a letter had commanded it. "Damon," she said, standing to embrace me. The hug was brief but warm. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "Of course," I lied, sliding into the seat across from her. "It's good to see you." We ordered, we made small talk, and then, about 20 minutes into the meal, Victoria's expression shifted. She set down her fork and looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something. It's part of why I reached out. I've been having these dreams." My stomach dropped. Dreams? About you, about us working together again, but not on architecture, on something else. Something important." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "I know how that sounds. Crazy, right? But they've been so vivid, Damon, and they all start the same way, with me reaching out to you in February, with us meeting for lunch, and then you tell me about a letter." The bistro suddenly felt too warm, too loud. The clatter of dishes and hum of conversation became overwhelming. "A letter? From your past? Something you wrote to yourself that's coming true?" Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I know this sounds insane. I know we haven't talked in 2 years, and I have no right to show up in your life with conspiracy theories. But I had to ask, is there a letter, Damon?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The letter hadn't mentioned this. It had told me to meet with Victoria, but it hadn't explained why, hadn't warned me that she would somehow know about it. How could she know? How could any of this be possible? "The dreams started 3 months ago," Victoria continued, filling the silence. "Always the same. You and me working on something in a house I've never seen before. And there's someone else there, someone we're trying to help or stop or understand. The dreams aren't clear on that part, but they all insist that this lunch has to happen, that if it doesn't, something breaks, something that can't be fixed." I pulled out my phone with numb fingers and showed her the letter. Not because I'd decided to trust her, but because I couldn't carry this alone anymore. The isolation of the past few days had been suffocating, and if Victoria somehow already knew part of the story, then maybe she was supposed to be part of this. Maybe that was the point of the directive. She read it in silence, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished, she looked up at me with eyes that reflected my own terror. "February 28th, the package with the key and the photograph. That's in 9 days." "I know. And you're supposed to go to the house at midnight alone." "That's what it says." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table in a nervous rhythm. "In my dreams," she finally said, "I'm there too, at the house. You're not alone, even though you think you are. I show up just after midnight, and when you ask me how I knew to find you, I tell you I followed the same letter, my own version of it." "That's impossible. I wrote one letter, just one." "Did you?" She pulled out her own phone and opened her photos, scrolling until she found what she was looking for. She turned the screen to face me. It was a photograph of a letter, yellowed and aged, in handwriting that was distinctly not mine, but somehow similar. The same slant, the same pressure, as if we'd learned penmanship from the same teacher. The date at the top read April 15th, 2019, the same date as mine. "I found this yesterday in a box of my college things I haven't opened in years, and it told me to reach out to you today. It told me you'd show me your letter. It told me that we're connected in this, whatever this is." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, my mind racing through implications I couldn't fully process. 2 letters, 2 directives, 2 people being controlled by versions of themselves that couldn't possibly have known what they were predicting. "What does yours say?" I managed to ask. "About February 28th. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she lowered her phone. "That I need to follow you to the house, that I need to bring something with me, a specific object that I'll know when I see it, and that once we're both inside, we'll understand why this is happening. We'll understand what we wrote these letters to accomplish. And if we don't go, if we just refuse? I tried that, she said quietly. 2 days ago, my letter said I'd receive a phone call at 6 p.m. from my mother, who I haven't spoken to in 5 years. It said I had to answer it, had to agree to visit her in March. I decided not to. I decided to prove the letter wrong. She paused, her throat working as she swallowed hard. At 6 p.m. exactly, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, and that night I had the worst dream I've ever experienced. I was in that house, the one from all my other dreams, but you weren't there, and I was trapped, Damon, screaming and clawing at doors that wouldn't open, windows that wouldn't break. I woke up with marks on my hands, actual scratches, as if I really been trying to escape something. She held up her palms. Thin red lines crisscrossed her skin, some still scabbed over. The next morning, Victoria continued, I called my mother back. I apologized. I agreed to visit. And the dreams went back to normal. Still vivid, still strange, but not punishing. The food on our plates had gone cold. Neither of us had eaten in several minutes. Around us, the bistro continued its lunch service, oblivious to the conversation happening in the corner, to the two people grappling with the impossible. So we're trapped, I said, following orders from ourselves, or from something pretending to be ourselves. And if we resist, we get hurt. Or worse, Victoria added. My letter has a warning near the end. It says that the directives are escalating, that they'll ask for bigger and bigger sacrifices, and that the only way through is forward. We can't go back. We can't stop. We can only move toward February 28th and hope that whatever's waiting in that house has answers. I thought about my own letter, about the final directive that sent me to an unknown house at midnight. Alone, it had said. But Victoria's letter contradicted that. So which version was true? Or were they both true somehow, in ways that would only make sense when we arrived? 9 days, I said. We have 9 days to prepare, to figure out what we're walking into. Victoria nodded, but her expression was grim. Or 9 days for things to get much, much worse. She was right, of course. The letter had more directives, more predictions. February 14th was in 2 days. The man in the red jacket on the corner of 5th and Madison. The sign about negotiable ends. The something he would hand me that I was supposed to take without question. And then February 20th, the promotion I was supposed to refuse. Each directive pulled me further from the life I'd known, from the person I'd been. Each one forced me to act against my own interests, my own desires, in service of some master plan I hadn't consciously created. We sat in that bistro for another hour, comparing our letters line by line, looking for patterns or explanations. The more we read, the more convinced I became that these weren't letters at all. They were instructions, blueprints, and we were building something with our obedience, constructing some reality that our past selves had designed. The question was, what were we building, and would we survive it once it was complete? February 14th arrived wrapped in freezing rain, the kind that coats everything in ice and makes the city treacherous. I'd spent the past 2 days in a state of constant dread, checking and rechecking the letter's prediction about the man in the red jacket. Victoria and I had exchanged dozens of messages, comparing notes, theorizing, and ultimately accepting that we had no choice but to follow where our past selves were leading us. I left work at 5:30 p.m., the exact time that would put me at the corner of 5th and Madison at 5:47, according to my usual walking pace. The letter hadn't specified a time, but I'd learned to trust the precision of everything else it had gotten right. If it said I'd be walking home from work when I encountered the man, then it would happen during my evening commute. The streets were nearly empty, most people having opted for taxis or ride shares rather than brave the ice. My boots slipped twice on the slick sidewalk, and I had to grab a streetlight to keep from falling. Everything felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life, following a script I hadn't auditioned for. I saw him from half a block away. Red jacket, exactly as described, bright against the gray evening. He stood motionless on the corner, despite the weather, holding a cardboard sign above his head. Even from this distance, I could read the words painted in black marker. "The end is negotiable." My steps slowed. Every instinct screamed at me to cross the street to avoid this encounter entirely, but the letter's warning echoed in my mind. The directives weren't suggestions, they were corrections. Defiance had consequences. As I approached, the man's head turned toward me with an unnatural precision, as if he'd been waiting specifically for this moment. He was older than I'd expected, maybe 60, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed too bright, too aware. When I was 10 feet away, he spoke. "Damon." Not a question, a statement. My name in his mouth felt like a violation, intimate and wrong. I stopped, frozen in place, despite the icy rain soaking through my coat. "You know what to do," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate, and when his hand emerged, it held a small object wrapped in cloth. "Take this. Don't open it here. Don't open it until the night of February 28th, exactly 1 hour before midnight. Do you understand?" I nodded, unable to find my voice. He extended the wrapped object, and I took it with numb fingers. It was heavier than I had expected, dense and solid, about the size of a deck of cards. Through the cloth I could feel something metallic, something with edges and weight. "The pattern is accelerating," the man said, his eyes boring into mine. "You'll feel it over the next week. Time will start to slip. Memories will surface that you've never had before. Don't fight it. Fighting only makes the transition more painful." "To what?" I managed to ask. His smile was sad, almost pitying. "To the truth, to the reality you've been building towards since April 15th, 2019. Your younger self understood something that your current self has forgotten. That's why the letter exists, to remind you, to guide you back." To back to what? But he was already walking away, disappearing into the freezing rain with his sign held high. I stood on the corner, clutching the wrapped object, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. Around me, the city continued its evening rush, oblivious to the transaction that had just occurred, to the fact that my reality had shifted another degree toward the incomprehensible. I didn't unwrap the object. Instead, I shoved it deep into my coat pocket and hurried home, my thoughts racing. What did he mean about time slipping, about memories I'd never had? I found out that night. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, when the first one hit. A memory, vivid and complete, of a conversation I'd never actually had. I was sitting in my college dorm room with Victoria, both of us 22, talking about time and fate and whether our choices really mattered. She was crying, and I was holding her hand, and we were making a pact. "We'll write letters," she was saying in this memory, "to our future selves, but not normal letters, instructions, a roadmap back to this moment, back to what we know is true before the world convinces us otherwise." What if it doesn't work? I heard myself ask. It has to work, because if it doesn't, we'll forget. We'll forget what we saw, what we learned, what we know is coming. The only way to survive what's ahead is to leave ourselves breadcrumbs back to the truth. The memory faded, leaving me gasping and disoriented. I'd never had that conversation. Victoria and I had been friends in college, but not that close. Not the kind of friends who made late-night pacts or cried together. And yet the memory felt absolutely real, more real than many of my actual memories from that time. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "It's starting, isn't it? The memories." "Yes," I typed back. "How did you know?" My letter mentioned it, said that around February 14th we'd start remembering our original selves, the versions of us that wrote the letters. Damon, I don't think we're being controlled by our past. I think we're being reminded of who we used to be before something changed us, before something went wrong. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. What did we see in college? What did we learn that was so important we had to leave ourselves instructions? "I don't know yet," Victoria said, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "The memories are fragmentary, but there's a pattern to them. They're all from April 2019, all from the days leading up to when we wrote the letters, and they all involve a house." "The house from the photograph?" "I think so. I remember going there with you. I remember finding something inside, something that explained everything. But every time I try to focus on what it was, the memory slips away like water through my fingers." Over the next 6 days, the memories intensified. They came at random times, during meetings, while cooking dinner, in the shower. Each one showed me a version of my past that didn't align with what I consciously remembered. In these new memories, Victoria and I had been inseparable in college. We'd discovered something together, some truth about the nature of reality or time or fate, and we'd been terrified enough to create an elaborate system of letters and directives to guide our future selves back to it. But in my conscious memories, the ones I'd lived with for 7 years, Victoria had been a casual friend, someone I'd worked with occasionally but never been particularly close to. We certainly never made mystical pacts or explored abandoned houses together. Which version was real? Or were they both real, somehow existing simultaneously, and the directives were forcing me to merge them back together? February 20th arrived, and with it came the next directive. Bernard Lowe called me into his office at exactly 3 p.m. I'd been dreading this moment, had rehearsed a dozen different ways to decline the promotion I knew he was about to offer. But when I sat across from him and he slid the offer letter across his desk, when I saw the new title and the salary increase that would change my life significantly, the words stuck in my throat. "This is incredible, Bernard. Really, I'm honored that you thought of me." He smiled, proud, paternal. "You've earned it, Damon. No one deserves this more. Say yes, and we'll start the paperwork immediately. You could begin in the new role by March 1st. March 1st, the day after I was supposed to go to the mystery house at midnight. The timing couldn't be coincidental. The promotion was bait, a test of whether I'd follow the directive or choose my own interests. I need to decline, I heard myself say, the words coming out flat and emotionless. Bernard's expression shifted from pride to confusion to something approaching anger. Decline? Damon, this is a significant opportunity. Can I ask why? I had no answer that would sound insane. I'm considering other opportunities, personal reasons. I'm sorry. The conversation deteriorated from there. Bernard tried to convince me, then questioned my commitment to the firm, then finally accepted my decision with barely concealed disappointment. I walked out of his office feeling like I'd just set fire to my career, like I'd traded my future for obedience to a letter written by a version of myself I didn't remember being. That night, another memory surfaced. Victoria and I standing inside a house I'd never seen before, but somehow recognized. We were looking at something on the wall, some kind of diagram or map that showed multiple timelines branching and converging, and we were understanding, finally, what it meant. We're not in the original timeline anymore, my younger self was saying in this memory. Something split us off, changed us, made us forget. But we can get back, if we're careful, if we leave ourselves the right instructions. The letters, Victoria said, they have to be perfect. Every directive has to push us toward the convergence point. Any deviation, and we'll stay in this wrong timeline forever. And if we stay here, I asked, then the world ends in 2027, not with a bang, with a slow fade. People will just stop existing one by one until there's nothing left. We saw it, Damon. We saw the future this timeline leads to. The letter is the only way to prevent it. The memory ended, leaving me shaking and breathless. A world that ends in 2027. A slow fade into nothingness. Was that real? Or was I having a complete psychological breakdown, my mind inventing elaborate fantasies to explain the inexplicable? I texted Victoria. My memories say we're trying to prevent the world from ending. Does that match yours? Her response took 5 minutes. When it came, it was just 2 words. Yes. Exactly. We were both experiencing the same impossible memories, receiving the same impossible mission from our younger selves, which meant either we were both insane in exactly the same way, or something genuinely impossible was happening. February 28th was now 2 days away. The package was supposed to arrive tomorrow, containing a key and a photograph of the house where everything would be revealed, where Victoria and I would finally understand what our younger selves had seen, what they'd been trying to prevent, and whether following these directives would actually save the world or simply complete our descent into madness. I unwrapped the object the man in the red jacket had given me. Inside the cloth was a compass, old and brass, with strange markings around its face instead of cardinal directions. The needle didn't point north. It spun slowly in circles, as if searching for something it couldn't quite locate. And beneath the compass, written on a small card in my own handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it, were 3 words: trust the needle. The package arrived at 2:17 p.m. on February 27th, exactly as the letter had predicted. I'd been sitting by my apartment door for 3 hours, unable to focus on anything else, my whole body tense with anticipation and dread. When the delivery notification chimed on my phone, I nearly jumped out of my skin. No return address, just as the letter had warned. The box was small, wrapped in brown paper that felt old despite being freshly delivered. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside, a brass key, tarnished with age, and a photograph. The house in the picture was Victorian, 3 stories of weathered gray siding and dark windows that looked like empty eyes. It sat isolated at the end of a long dirt road surrounded by bare trees that seemed to lean away from it as if repelled by something. And Victoria was right. I'd never seen this house before, but I recognized it. In my fragmented new memories, I'd been inside it. I'd walked its halls. I'd discovered something in its depths that had changed everything. The back of the photograph had an address written in faded ink, 1847 Ashwood Lane, about 40 miles north of the city. And beneath the address, in my own handwriting, midnight, March 1st, come alone, trust yourself. But I wouldn't be alone. Victoria's letter had told her to follow me, to bring something she'd know when she saw it. We'd already made plans to meet there, had spent the past week preparing for whatever we'd find. I called her. It came, the package. Mine too, she said. Her voice sounded hollow, exhausted. Damon, I found the object, the thing I'm supposed to bring. It was in my parents' attic, in a box of my college things I haven't touched in years. It's a journal, my journal from April 2019. I didn't remember keeping one, but here it is, and it's full of entries about you, about the house, about everything we discovered. What does it say? What did we discover? I can't read most of it. The ink is smeared, like someone tried to erase it, or like it's bleeding through from another timeline. But there's one entry I can make out, dated April 16, 2019, the day after we wrote the letters. It says, "We did it. We set the correction in motion. 7 years from now, we'll return to the house and complete the loop. If we succeed, this timeline will collapse and we'll wake up in the original one, with full memories of both. If we fail, we'll cease to exist along with everyone else. But at least we tried. At least we gave ourselves a chance." My apartment felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. So we're not trying to prevent the end of the world. We're trying to jump to a different timeline. And if we fail, we just disappear? According to my journal, yes. But Damon, there's more. The last page has a list of names. People who are supposed to be alive in the original timeline, but died in this one. Car accidents, sudden illness, random violence. 23 names. And the final entry says that if we don't complete the correction, the list will keep growing until everyone is on it. 23 people dead who shouldn't be. A world slowly bleeding out. Reality unwinding one person at a time until nothing remained. And somehow, 2 22-year-olds had figured this out, had seen the future clearly enough to create a 7-year plan to fix it. Or we were both experiencing elaborate shared delusions, our minds breaking under stress in perfectly synchronized ways. I'll meet you there, 11:30 p.m. tomorrow. We go in together. The letters say you're supposed to go alone. The letters say a lot of things, but I trust the version that says you show up right after midnight. We'll do this together, Victoria, however it ends. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. I walked through my apartment touching things, my books, my furniture, Pilot's favorite toy, as if memorizing them, as if I might never see them again. Because if the journal was right, I wouldn't. Either I'd wake up in a different timeline where this apartment and this life had never existed, or I'd simply cease to be. At 10 p.m., I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, studying my own face. Was this really me? Or was the real me buried somewhere in those fragmentary memories, the version who discovered impossible truths and spent 7 years guiding myself back to this moment? The compass from the man in the red jacket sat on my sink. Its needle had stopped spinning and now pointed steadily in one direction, northeast, toward Ashwood Lane. "Trust the needle," the note had said. Trust myself. I grabbed my coat, pocketed the key and the compass, and headed out into the freezing February night. The drive took 52 minutes. Victoria had texted that she was leaving the city at the same time, approaching from a different direction, so we'd arrive separately as the letters dictated. The roads were empty, just me and the occasional truck hauling goods through the darkness. My headlights cut through the night, illuminating nothing but asphalt and bare trees. 1847 Ashwood Lane appeared exactly as it had in the photograph. The house loomed against the starless sky, somehow darker than the darkness around it. Every window was black, no lights, no signs of life, just the structure itself, waiting. I parked at the end of the dirt road and checked my phone. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight. Victoria's last text had come 15 minutes ago. "Almost there. See you inside." The compass needle pointed directly at the front door. I walked up the creaking porch steps, the brass key heavy in my hand. It slid into the lock as if it had been made yesterday, turning smoothly despite the house's obvious age. The door swung open on silent hinges. Inside was darkness so complete I had to use my phone's flashlight. The beam revealed a foyer coated in dust, furniture covered in sheets, a staircase leading up into blackness. The air smelled of abandonment and something else, something almost chemical, like ozone after a lightning strike. "Damon?" I spun around. Victoria stood in the doorway, her face pale in the reflected light of my phone. She held a leather journal clutched to her chest. "I couldn't wait. I had to know, had to see if you'd really come." We stood there for a moment, two people on the edge of something incomprehensible, bound together by letters we'd written and forgotten, by memories that might not be real, by a shared mission that sounded insane when spoken aloud. "The journal says we have to go to the basement. There's something there, something we left for ourselves 7 years ago." We found the basement door behind the kitchen. The stairs descended into darkness that seemed to swallow my flashlight beam. Each step creaked under our weight, and I had the irrational fear that the house was swallowing us, that we'd descend forever into nothing. But the stairs ended. The basement opened up into a single large room with concrete walls and a dirt floor. And in the center of that room stood something that made my brain rebel against what I was seeing. It was a door, just a door, freestanding in the middle of the basement, with no frame, no wall to support it. It stood upright as if held by invisible hands, and through the gap beneath it, I could see the dirt floor on the other side. It shouldn't have been able to exist, shouldn't have been able to stand without support. But it did. And carved into its surface, in letters that seemed to glow faintly in my flashlight beam, were words in my handwriting and Victoria's, alternating back and forth. "We are the architects of our own salvation. We saw what comes and chose to change it. 7 years of directives to lead us home. Open this door at midnight, March 1st, 2026. Trust the journey. Trust each other. Trust ourselves. My phone read 11:59 p.m. "What's on the other side?" I whispered. Victoria opened her journal to the last page and read aloud. "The original timeline, the world as it was meant to be, before the divergence, where those 23 people still live, where we remember both versions of reality and can prevent the split from ever happening. But crossing over requires a sacrifice. We have to leave something behind, something that matters." "What kind of something?" She turned the page, but it was empty. No answer, no instruction, just empty paper and 30 seconds until midnight. The compass in my pocket had begun to vibrate, its needle spinning wildly. The basement suddenly felt charged with energy, the air thick and electric. The door in the center of the room started to hum, a low frequency I felt in my bones. "Damon!" Victoria gripped my arm. "I'm scared." "Me too." My phone clicked over to 12 a.m. The door burst open on its own, revealing not the basement beyond, but something else entirely, a corridor of light that seemed to stretch into infinity, images flickering along its walls like a film reel. I saw myself at 22, writing the letter by candlelight. I saw Victoria making the same motions, the same desperate choices. I saw the house as it had been 7 years ago, filled with equipment and research, and 2 college students who'd stumbled onto something they shouldn't have been able to understand. And I saw the divergence point, the moment in time where reality had split, where something had gone wrong and created this doomed timeline we'd been living in. It was small, insignificant, a car turning left instead of right, avoiding an accident that was supposed to happen, saving someone who was supposed to die. That single change had cascaded forward, creating a world that looked almost right, but was slowly collapsing under the weight of its own impossibility. We'd seen it somehow, predicted it, and we'd spent 7 years manipulating ourselves into this exact moment, this exact choice. Walk through the door and correct reality, or turn away and let everything end. "The sacrifice," I said, understanding finally. "We have to give up these 7 years, all our memories, all our experiences in this timeline, everyone we met, everything we did. It won't have happened. We'll wake up on April 16th, 2019, remembering only the original timeline." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. 7 years of our lives, gone. I thought about those 7 years, the projects I'd worked on, the places I'd traveled. Pilot sleeping on my kitchen counter despite my protests. My apartment, my life, all of it would be unmade, replaced by different experiences, different choices, a different version of myself I couldn't predict or imagine. But I also thought about the list of 23 names, people who died in this timeline who deserved to live, and all the others who would follow them if we turned away, the slow fade into nothingness that my journal had predicted. "We have to go through," I said, "don't we?" Victoria looked at me with eyes that held both terror and determination. Together? Together. We held hands, 2 people standing at the threshold of something impossible, about to sacrifice everything they'd known for a chance at a world that might not even exist. The corridor of light beckoned, promising answers and oblivion in equal measure. I took the first step through the door. The world exploded into white light and infinite possibility. I felt myself stretching across time, experiencing every moment of the past 7 years simultaneously, every joy and sorrow, every choice and consequence, and then feeling them compress into nothing, into a single point of light that blinked out like a candle flame. And then I woke up in my college dorm room, sunlight streaming through familiar windows, my phone showing April 16th, 2019. Victoria was calling me, her voice bright and excited and terrified all at once. "Did you feel it? Did it work?" I looked at my left hand. No scar. The mandolin accident had never happened, because in this timeline, I'd never bought one. I'd made different choices, lived a different life. But I remembered both versions now, held them in my mind like parallel tracks that had finally merged. "It worked," I said. "We're home." But even as I said it, I found another envelope on my desk. Different handwriting this time. Not mine, not Victoria's, but someone else's. The date, April 16th, 2026. 7 years in the future, or 7 years that would have to happen again differently this time. Inside was a single sentence. "Thank you for completing the correction. Now the real work begins." And I understood finally that we hadn't ended anything. We'd only completed one loop, one cycle in a pattern we're just beginning to see. The directives would continue, the letters would keep coming, and somewhere, sometime, another version of ourselves would have to make the same impossible choice all over again. Because reality isn't linear. It's a spiral, and we just stepped on to the next turn.